Boom. Okay, we're back on stream and
Okay, we're back on stream.
we're back on
There, I'm
stream.
joining your activity again. Um, yeah, why does the video still have the loading screen, like
Still is video
the
loading,
YouTube?
hey. Let's get rid of this. Let me just, all right, let me say leave activity and
Okay,
let's,
yeah, I just left as well.
yeah, so now we'll do a new watch together. Get the URL.
It was 21:56, by the way, was the time.
Nice. Well done for noting that. Appreciate that.
Oh, it's here. I'll leave again, and then I'll join again because I think it made me host.
Oh yeah, no, it's saying trouble loading the app here. I hope this works. That was very annoying. We were on a good tear there.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go. All right, I think we got it back. Let's see.
Ah, there you go. Okay, I'm just gonna leave and come back really quick
Welcome to the Bill
because I
Show,
got some
where
weird
we
stuff. Okay, there you go.
Nice. Okay, 21:56. You said.
Yeah, I mean, you could probably go slightly before because I think you dropped out just before that. That's
Okay.
just when I paused it.
All right. Sweet. Let's go from here.
Wait, I'm getting the loading screen again, like the circle. So I wonder if
Oh,
is
you
that
are.
just me?
Can you hear it? If I.
Oh no.
patient, consumer, individual,
Oh, we're good. We're
and
good
the
now.
health
Yeah.
practitioner. But
Nice. Okay. Cool.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's kick back on. Yeah. Sorry about that, guys. My internet crapped out there, but we are back, and we're gonna carry on.
that's a dietitian or an MD or whatever. And then you negotiate based on the needs and the preferences and the trade-offs of that specific situation. Now, take for instance, if you have if you're a middle-aged male and you're prone to accumulate iron in your liver, well, it may be worthwhile to consider your red meat intake as a potential factor in this, and you may have to be very careful about your red meat intake, unless you do
That's the
you
first.
give
That's the
blood
first time I've heard
regularly
him
and you
suggest
have ways to
moderating
deal with
intake.
it.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of surprised to hear that, to be
Yeah.
honest. I often think when interacting with these people, these people, but you know what I'm saying. I'm arguing with people on LinkedIn, and it's as if they are contractually forbidden from saying that anybody should eat less meat in any circumstance. Like I've been in conversations before where I say, I've just gone to like the extremes of saying, what if someone is deadly allergic to meat? Should they avoid eating meat? And they're like, well, they'll just talk around it.
Yeah.
It's like, come on.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's as if I don't know, revealing like that level of inability to say something that's obviously true. I think is very devastating. But okay,
But
feel
but
free to Freddie here.
but here's the thing. He's talking about it in the context of what it sounded like, probably like overload or something like that. Those are going to be, especially if like moderating red meat intake is what's going to make the difference. Those are probably pretty rare cases, right? So he's not talking about the cases where like, hey, to prevent cardiovascular disease or reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease, you should limit intake. It's like no, in these very specific cases, maybe you look at moderating intake.
Right, yeah. If you have iron overload, which
Yeah,
presumably is going to be a relatively rare thing. That's not really
yeah,
something I've heard much about. And of course, anemia. They'll have to talk about anemia and no
yeah.
mention of either how serious that is or how prevalent it is compared to CVD, for example. But again, it's just zooming in on like cherry picking the things that favor eat more meat.
Um, if you're, however, a someone in need of more iron, which is often the case for young females, in particular because of the blood losses, well, then you wanna contrast the evidence of low certainty um, related to chronic disease with the need for iron for your physiology,
Okay.
and
So
especially
here, pause
also
that for a sec. So this is a false dichotomy, I think. So if we look at, um, for one, saying low certainty based on grade, I mean, depending on the outcome, it could be moderate certainty. Again, it just depends on what specific, like, but I'm talking like chronic disease outcomes. But even if we say low certainty, we're talking about the leading killer with cardiovascular disease in particular. Now, with anemia, yes, that is something that can really affect quality of life, and it is something that should be treated for sure. But to recommend red meat as the solution to that over like high dose iron supplementation, for example, or in some cases, perhaps iron infusions, which are going to be the most effective, I don't see the basis for that recommendation. What is the certainty of evidence behind like red meat interventions and boosting iron status? I haven't actually looked at the like grade scores if there are in some of the meta analyses on that, but I imagine it's not going to be fantastic. Um, it's probably mostly observational database. I don't know that there are a ton of randomized controlled trials showing, substantial impact there. So, but again, that's without. I'd have to double check to make a stronger statement one way or another. Um, but you're talking about something for which there are alternatives like iron supplementation versus the potential increase in the risk of the leading killer and many of the other top 10 killers. So why not weigh the severity of the situation as well versus just the certainty of evidence?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is really the reason why these guys would not want to be making these points when there's somebody here to challenge them on that, because it's so easy to point to, like, clearly there's stronger arguments in favor of doing iron supplementation and not getting that from red meat. And it's very, yeah, it wouldn't stand up to any argumentation if they're being challenged on this live.
Yeah, I'm trying to see based on a recent meta. You can keep playing. I'm just checking to see if they have the grade score for this this latest meta analysis on the topic. But go ahead, keep playing.
Take that or evaluate this within the broader context of different health markers and all the other information your health professional will have access to.
Yeah, and I spoke with Gordon Guyette last week, and so check out the episode before this, listeners. But we did get into this sort of evidence-based medicine and grade in particular. So in general, there's very low certainty evidence for a lot of these things. So you're saying to be cautious with being overly confident or prescriptive about this is what needs to happen, right? It's sort of considering all of the evidence in context. And then I hear in life stages, infants and young children is a really concerning stage, right? To try veganism. So 6 to 23 months, very consequential if nutritional needs are not met during that phase in that period. But then you also have adolescents, you have women of reproductive age. So this 15 to 49 years of age, you have older adults that often have trouble eating enough protein and enough calories. So having more animal source foods can be helpful. So I think there's a lot of potential nuances in that discussion. So let's talk about the other side of things. Okay. Now we don't need to go full carnivore, but when we think of omnivorous
you can
diets,
stop here really quick.
What?
Just FYI, on the latest meta, they actually didn't do any grade scoring, so we can't tell you. But anyways, even on that, again, why not then work on educating people on where the things are that they might need to consider? Like, for example, caloric density, if you're talking about young kids, obviously protein intake, iron intake, B12 fortification or supplementation. Like why not educate on these things versus, again, just like fear mongering around it? And of course, keeping in mind that in pretty much all of these situations, there are concerns with an omnivorous diet as well. And especially talking about older adults, they're saying, oh, you need to worry about protein and this and that. Well, but what type of protein? If you look at the substitution analyses comparing plant protein to animal proteins, especially if that animal protein is from things like red meat, you see that the plant protein is clearly preferable when it comes to like healthy aging criteria, frailty scores, cardiovascular disease. So those are going to be bigger factors than just saying, oh, hey, eat this food because of the protein, when it actually comes with a whole bunch of other baggage that might worsen health outcomes in some ways.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. Yeah, and they have this trick where they kind of go down the list. Well, plant-based diets could be healthy unless you're a child or old or it's like, okay, this could be like 70% of the population, right?
Yeah. So if you're a 20-year-old to 30-year-old dude, you're fine.
Right.
but anyone else, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and again, it's a lot of like very vague implication without any strong claims that these groups couldn't have plant-based diets and stuff like that. And again, right, we sound like break record, but ignoring the downsides, ignoring the negative health outcomes of including more animal products in your diet, ignoring the hierarchy of evidence as it applies to this question. We're going to stay down here talking about mechanistic and bioavailability. And, yeah.
You know what? I'm actually thinking of something like, because I was just thinking like, man, if I was in a debate situation with these people, I just don't think they'd be able to navigate that. Like, yeah, you can be so direct with so many questions. I actually recall there was one time, I believe it was Freddie Leroy. I'm yeah, from memory, I'm like 95% sure that was the case, where they were citing, there was a meta-analysis on substitution study or substitution analyses where they looked at if you were to substitute out X amount of red meat with all of these other food groups, and they separately analyzed all of them, what would the impact on coronary heart disease or all-cause mortality be? And I remember and I believe Ty actually like retweeted it or vice versa. But he said something about how, there was no impact when substituting red meat for nuts, or I don't know if it was beans or whatever it was. And I commented, I was like, well, actually, if you look at like a dose for dose comparison, there was a benefit because they did two separate analyses. They did one analysis where it was just like just studies where there was a substitution, but it wasn't necessarily equated for like the number of servings or for the percentage of calories or whatever. So it wasn't necessarily like an equal swap. And in that case, like you could have been swapping a very, or it's not even that it wasn't an equal swap, it might have been a very small swap, and it might not have been enough to see a difference. But they did a second analysis where it was specifically one serving per day. Where they were swapping one serving of one food for one serving of another. And in that one, pretty much across the board, subbing out red meat for especially the plant protein sources was beneficial, and some of the other animal protein sources as well. And I commented to clarify, I was like, well, actually, like a dose for dose comparison, there was a clear benefit. And he like didn't get it, and he kept responding. He's like, no, this is what it says. This is what it says. I said, no, look at this table. You're citing the wrong table. It's this. And he and then like there was some kind of like cope response. I can't remember because this was so long ago. But I remember I had to then ask him 2 or 3 times directly, can you admit you were wrong about that first claim? Like I just had to directly ask him, like, hey, can you acknowledge that was incorrect? Because that's what they will never do. They will eventually he did, and then he still kind of coped and was like, oh, but it's like kind of right, like something stupid like that. Right. But like that's the sort of type of pressure that I think needs to be put on them in these situations. Obviously, when they're talking to each other, they're just gonna go down the same kind of rabbit hole of whatever they want to talk about. But in like a debate scenario, I think that's probably one of the big reasons he doesn't do them. I think he would just absolutely fall apart in that sort of situation, just because it's so easy to address pretty much everything that they've said so far.
Yeah, and it's so easy to say it when you're not being challenged, right? Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I'm really just still kind of smiling to myself in the knowledge of the thing that Ty Villa said, well, Freddie Leroy did this debate. It's like, he didn't actually. So as far as we know, he's not done any live debates about any of this stuff, and probably would be wise to continue avoiding them.
It sounds like it.
Do you hear are people's biggest concerns about meat from a nutritional perspective, about meat and other animal products that you have sort of face like in a regular basis?
Well, besides the health discussion, you quickly have conversations around sustainability, the environmental impact, sustainability, the ethical side of things is often mentioned, and those are again very complicated discussions on their own. So that any of those 3 big debates around animal source foods, whether that's nutrition, environment, or ethics, are very complicated discussions. They're very contextual. And the problem is that they're very.
There's the merchants of doubt again, right? It's just like, well, they're all super complicated. There's too much. Like people can't possibly understand what the right answer is here. It's all moving away from clarity rather towards it is the goal here.
Very much also simplified in the usual narratives that we hear, whether that's media or in your daily conversations. A lot of simplification, a lot of reductionism, and that's not very helpful. I know it's difficult.
Wait, a lot of reductionism. Okay, now what have we just spent the last like hour talking about here? They're going over specific nutrients, supposed bioavailability, even though they're like wrong about most of that on specific nutrients. They're talking about rare cases of, iron overload where they might have to moderate red meat intake. Like they're literally, they are making all of the reductionist arguments versus focusing on like the long-term health outcomes that, the data that we have, focusing on like case reports, which is hilarious. And then trying to say that the vegans are reductionist.
Yeah, it's
That's bonkers. That's absolutely bonkers.
There's a lot of projection going on.
Yeah.
I sense that the conversation might be moving away from health stuff now, but this section is called Nutritional Perspectives on Meat.
Yeah, we can keep going a little bit. Processed meat, understanding the nuances. That's hilarious.
That'll be a good one.
Well, let's see how far, because I don't have a lot of time. So unless I really need to chime in, I'll try to just stay quiet, just to chime in.
All right,
the best
good.
part.
No, we're here for your chime in, so
Okay.
Yeah.
Whatever. We'll do as much as we can.
A lot of information and knowledge and insights to be able to navigate those three debates. But it's not helpful if we're going to stereotype it and bring it down to simplistic statements.
Some of the things that I hear, I think the big three in terms of nutrition are red meat, processed meat, and saturated fat. So can you tell us a little bit about the evidence of these different potential health risks from animal source foods?
Well, red meat and processed meats actually have been addressed by the great people. So Bradley Johnston did it, and his colleagues.
Nutrirex.
They did a series of articles on that specific topic, and they came to the conclusion that the evidence is indeed low to very low certainty, depending on what you're looking at. And then, importantly, they also had a paper specifically.
Okay, let's pause that really quick. Let's just pause that really quick. I'll try to address it super fast. If somebody wants to go into like great detail, Avi Bitterman made a YouTube series like on the Nutrirex papers and like went into insane detail on all of that. But basically, they did a couple things. They modified the grade criteria. So he's talking about grade. They actually changed it a bit in a way that would basically lead to downgrading the evidence. So they did a. I'm going to oversimplify here just for sake of time, but basically they looked at associations between red meat intake and a small amount of red meat. This is less than a serving a day. This is like 3 servings a week or something like that, I think, and different health outcomes. And then they looked at, how strong that association was. And then they looked at research on like overall dietary patterns and health outcomes. And basically they concluded that if the red meat intake or the dose or whatever the effect, I believe it wasn't larger than the dietary patterns or the data from the dietary pattern meta-analysis, then it wouldn't be considered a strong like dose response or something. I might be misremembering a few details, but it was this weird comparison. And Avi actually went into the data and found that in the dietary patterns, the exposure contrast in red meat intake was actually larger than in the red meat specific studies. So so it actually didn't like fit what they thought it would. So that's one issue. And then they downgraded the evidence for that, even though there was no basis for doing so. And then more than that, so they did find associations between red meat intake and a number of health outcomes. They also did a publication where they essentially surveyed people on how meat fits into their lifestyle, their enjoyment, and all this sort of stuff. And their conclusion was kind of like, there's some evidence it's not super strong and people like meat, so let's not warn them against it. Like that's basically what it came down to. Like and imagine if you did that with smoking. People really like it. People love smoking, so screw it. Or like it's something less extreme. Let's say exercise. People like sitting on the couch and watching TV or whatever, and it just fits with their lifestyle. And the effect sizes we get from moderate exercise aren't that huge, so screw it. It's insane.
Why is this even being considered as part of? That's not any kind of health evidence.
No. It like when it comes to public health recommendations, yes, you have to consider where people are at, but you also need to kind of tell them what is beneficial or harmful, and allow them to make that choice. And so there was a number of problems with that. And then I know there was some controversy over Bradley Johnston not reporting ties to meat industry or something, but apparently it was after the period of time. I don't know if it was like a year or 2 years had passed or whatever, so he didn't have to report it. It's a bunch of stuff like that too. But there's all sorts of issues with those papers, and because I'm a little foggy on the memory, I would say Avi's videos breakdowns on that were like super super good.
Yeah, you recognize that straight away. The
Yeah.
Nutri-Rex thing. I remember hearing vaguely about that, but yeah, that's good. I might check out the more detail on that. Where else are we gonna go with this then?
The preferences of people, and I think this
Preferences.
paper
There you go.
in that series of articles has been misunderstood because people were not able to place it. But it is because within the grade approach, you would have to factor in the preferences and the needs of people. If there's
I don't think preferences.
preference
No,
in this,
hold on.
it's
I don't think the preferences were factored into grade. Now, I could be wrong again because it's been a minute. I don't think it was factored into the grade criteria. I think they did that analysis for like the health outcomes, and then they sort of synthesized all the evidence themselves, almost as like a opinion in a way, on like weighing the benefit or risk versus the enjoyment of personal preference. I believe, again, a little hazy, so I don't want to speak too strongly on it, but I think he's misrepresenting it there.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. So it's just like a second, like a auxiliary analysis rather than.
Yeah. There was like 5 papers that they published in sequence. Actually, all published at the same time.
Okay, yeah. It seems kind of bizarre to me to even include survey data in that kind of conversation, but you're saying that there could be some argument for like evaluating adherence for health advice, basically, for public health advice.
Maybe, yeah. I don't know. I'd have to read it again, but I don't think it was factored into grade, like the actual grading. And if it was, that's a very clear change to the standard grade criteria. So then you're not really using grade at that point, are you?
Right.
It's part of the deliberation, right? So if people really like meat and the evidence is of low certainty, then the conclusion of that process is that we shouldn't recommend a reduction of the intake levels compared to the current state of intake levels. Now, that statement, of course, created a whole controversy.
When you correct for some of the issues with the dose response stuff, Avi actually did this. Some of them would have been rated as, some of the findings would have been moderate certainty, not low certainty, just to clarify.
I mean, this just seems like an insane consideration to have. Well, people really like it. Like that is not anything to do with whether it's healthy. Yeah, exactly like you say, smoking, drinking. Like there's all sorts of things that people like.
Yeah,
that's mental. I've never heard this argument before.
And the whole it escalated quite a bit actually, but that was the conclusion of that comprehensive review process and meta-analysis. Then saturated fat comes with similar polarized debates where people have concluded that saturated fat and chronic disease outcomes, if you look at the quality of the certainty of the evidence, well, in most cases it comes out as neutral anyway, and it also depends on the context.
Oh, maybe he's going to mention here, but it depends on what you're replacing. So if you're replacing refined carbohydrates with saturated fat, yeah, you're not going to see much of a difference. If you're replacing saturated fat with polyunsaturated fats from like nuts, seeds, and oils, it's very clear. And not only do we have like long-term observational data, we actually have long-term randomized controlled trials on this topic as well, where they've done it in long-term care facilities and stuff like that, where you can really monitor diet, or I mean, in the past, like mental hospitals and stuff like that. So yeah, we have really good data supporting the replacement of saturated fat for polyunsaturated fats. It's one of the topics I'd say that we have like the strongest nutritional data for.
There you go. Let's see if he's going to take contention with that, or if it's more big gesturing.
Again, so what do you mean with saturated fat? If the intake is as whole foods elements within a healthy background diet, there's no particular reason for concern, unless you have really
super vague
situations, or when you have people that are high responders.
Super vague again.
Fat, you may again take it down to a patient health practitioner discussion. But at the population level, it's the saturated fat recommendations for me are among the problematic ones you still find out there in those recommendations, or sets of recommendations.
I think with saturated fat, many of the studies included trans fat in the saturated fat group. which is a very problematic how you
No.
disentangle
Okay,
the
let's
effect.
stop that. Let's stop that. So I know exactly what he's talking about. So in some of the older randomized controlled trials, like I believe no, not the LA veterans, maybe the Oslo study, like they make certain assumptions that the control diet, the saturated fat diet, was confounded by trans fats, uh, really with no good basis. But like sometimes they'll point out that like in the Oslo study, for example, in the general population, trans fats made up X amount of the diet. Therefore, for some reason, in this secondary prevention trial, and people who've had heart attacks are clearly going to be watching their diet afterwards, that somehow they were having the same amount of trans fats. Like there's all sorts of assumptions that take place. When in reality, actually, two of the studies that are commonly cited in favor of saturated fat not being harmful were the Minnesota Coronary Experiment and Sydney Diet Heart Study, where they were comparing saturated fats to margarines that were loaded with trans fats, or very likely loaded with trans fats at the time, because this was back in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s, I think, depending on the study. So it's actually kind of cuts against their argument. It's more likely, or it's more common that the trans fats actually confounded the polyunsaturated fats, because margarines used to contain a lot of trans fat.
I see. So they're saying that trans fats are dilute or are unfairly amplifying evidence that saturated fat's the problem, and in fact,
It's the other way around.
It's the other way around.
Yeah.
It's probably diluting it, if
Yeah.
anything. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So has he just got that wrong? He's just misunderstood what's going on there, or got a different representation?
Probably, unless for that Oslo study in particular, I've heard some of the arguments. I just don't think they're very strong at all, because you're making several assumptions. But with this particular claim that he's making, I don't know. Like that's just a guess.
Okay, fair enough.
From those two very different fats.
There are lots of things, but for me, the main problem still for me, and the more I look at this, the more I'm convinced that the main problem is still that you obtain your data within very specific cultural settings. So you take a population, which very often are health practitioners, or nurses, health professionals, which are very specific. You look at how they eat, and you make conclusions about a certain food or food group in that population and health outcomes. And then, the correlation causality thing becomes an issue, because there's so much going on there, and it's very tricky to make those to generalize conclusions to entire population. That's why if you look at the pure cohort,
stop before he gets to pure for a second. So for starters, he's talking about the nurses' health studies and health professionals' follow-up study, which I'd argue are probably the single best, or not single because there's 3 of them now, but the best observational, like perspective cohorts we have out there because of the data collection. Now, he was talking about how it's harder to make causal inference based on that. I would say it's easier to. It's more reasonable to, because you're taking populations of nurses and doctors who, at least with the nurses, same career, and you can look at like where they live and stuff too, and you can kind of estimate like socioeconomic status and all of that, and obviously you can have to some degree similar income. Obviously there's variety, but it's not going to be like a huge, massive difference. And then you have doctors who are all going to again have at least a certain level of income. So you're sort of in a way adjusting for or controlling for differences in income. And then they do an incredible amount of data collection, and this is because they're doctors and nurses who are going to be probably better at filling out a lot of the sort of surveys and things that are ditched out. So they look at things like not just obviously the age, sex, race, but smoking, and not just do you smoke, do you not smoke, did you used to smoke, but how much do you smoke, and then they adjust for that as well. Same sort of thing with exercise. How much do you exercise? They look at hormone replacement therapy, menopause, perimenopause, premenopause. They look at multivitamin use. A lot of them don't. They look at like use of certain medications, family history, a bunch of chronic diseases. They adjust for diet quality. By doing that, you're more able to isolate the variable of interest. You're more able to isolate the finding to the impact of whatever it is, red meat or what have you that you're looking at. Versus when you, like he's going to talk about the peer study in a second, you're talking about like 100 whatever countries, 119 countries. I can't even remember how many countries, but a lot of countries. that are going to be very different in all sorts of ways, and then you're going to try to determine, whether or not there's a causal association between a single variable. There's no way that you can adjust for all the differences between all of those different populations. You can try to minimize that to some degree, but you're just not going to, at least in comparison to a more uniform population like the nurses and doctors.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like he's saying that nurses are too specific a population to be able to generalize from that.
Well, so I mean, if you're adjusting for a lot of these, and I would say there's some degree of or that's somewhat reasonable, but I don't think to the degree that he's presenting it.
Yeah,
because
that doesn't seem that intuitive to me. Are nurses going to have massively different biological mechanisms going on? Why would that be?
Yeah, like I can understand more so if you're talking about a specific race or something like that, where maybe there's some genetic propensity to certain things, whether it's like cholesterol hyperabsorption or whatever, or more likely to store ectopic fat or something. In those cases, you can make an argument. But for nurses as a population, I think you might be removing people of like the lowest socioeconomic status kind of tier, like possibly, so maybe it won't apply to them. I mean, health wise, it'll still probably largely apply to them, but as far as like access, the feasibility of implementing these changes and whatnot certainly wouldn't apply. But what I just find particularly ironic is because he mentioned two things. He mentioned the generalizability, but he also mentioned the issues with being able to infer causality when he's about to mention the peer study, which we can let him talk about it, but there's so many issues with that one.
Yeah, interesting. That his bridge there sounded a little bit fumbling, like he didn't quite know what he wanted to say about that.
Yeah, that's what I think. I think he wasn't clear on what he's saying, and that's why we're like getting different kind of interpretations of it.
Yeah. Let's see what he says about pure then.
A study with all sorts of different countries from different places with completely different cultures, and interestingly, they find very different findings than than a lot of the Eurocentric or Eurocentric recommendations. Like whole grains come out as neutral, whole fat dairy seems to be better than low fat dairy, saturated fat associates with benefit rather than red meat again is
That's not true
protective.
either.
So it's almost everything.
You want to speak on that?
No, so basically they looked at a whole bunch of countries. I have notes on this somewhere, but I'm not going to pull it up right now. Looked at a whole bunch of countries, and basically there were some countries where the level of poverty is very, very high. And like there were some countries where, no joke, their main protein source, forget about carbohydrates, their main protein source was white rice. Okay. Yeah. Like that's what we're talking about here. And so in certain, like when you sort of chart saturated fat intake and mortality outcomes, those with the lowest saturated fat that is going to be in low single digits are going to have higher rates of higher risk of mortality than those with, say, a moderate saturated fat intake because they're impoverished. Like that's going to be a big problem there. Now, in future publications or after that initial publication looking at like saturated fat, which, by the way, if you took kind of the midpoint, which is more in line with like we'll say a more nutritionally adequate diet, but also within recommendations, and you compare that to high intakes actually did appear to be a bit worse. So to clarify, but he won't mention that. But later publications found that because carbohydrates in the initial publication were suggested to be harmful, when you break down the types or the sources, legumes are beneficial, or at least legumes paired with veggies, like starchy veggies, they were lumped into one group, if I recall, were beneficial. Whole grains were beneficial. He mentioned neutral. I'm pretty certain they were beneficial, and white rice was harmful, but maybe it was more neutral. I'd have to double check that. But it really actually further once you look at like the what sort of populations you're comparing to, what the specific quality of the different foods was, or different macronutrient sources was, you find that the higher quality plant-based foods, like the fruits, veggies, the whole grains, the legumes, tend to be more favorable, and the refined grains, especially in those populations where they're eating almost exclusively refined grains, were detrimental. And there were several editorials published after this, like commentaries, responding to a lot of the issues with the peer study, that again I don't think they'll bring up here, but they really dive into some of the like statistical issues and whatnot as well.
Okay. Let's see if they do. Let's see if they do. Yeah.
Upside down. And the reason may as well be because you're looking at a very different population group. And in some populations group, you will find, culture specific outcomes because of healthy user bias, because of what people believe, and what they have been fed as information, and the way they position their diets as a social way of, diets are extremely important as
and just pause that really quick.
Social signal.
How you remove those as like potential confounders is you look at a more uniform population and you adjust for known confounders, like in the nurses' health study and health professionals follow-up study. So he's actually supporting the use of the studies he was just crapping on a few minutes ago. So anyways.
Yeah, that's so interesting. He's like, well, we need to look at a broader evidence base, but
Yeah.
do that. There's all these compounds
Yeah.
in there. Okay. It's the emergence of doubt thing again, isn't it? It's just like make it impossible to ever get to at every stage. Just say, well, there's no, there's some uncertainty here, and yeah, I mean, I won't go off on a whole thing about this, but I was thinking earlier about how you can do this, pretty much just infinitely for any issue. You can say, well, there's only 99.999% certainty of this, and so maybe we should be, who knows, right? There's two options for whether or not the sun will come up tomorrow. It could be, right, it's anyone's game. Yeah.
Signal. People eat in specific ways to make social statements, and so depending on the social class you look at, you will get different results. And I know sometimes people correct for socioeconomics and so forth, but it doesn't capture the whole picture.
It's impossible to
adjust. But the pure study does? Hold on. Okay, look, I will agree that you're not going to do a perfect job. Okay, you're never going to do a perfect job. Sorry, are you still there? Because it like cut out for a second.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it's not going to do a perfect job with adjustments and that. But then to cite the pure study, where you're looking at drastically different populations, different countries, with different poverty rates, with different healthcare infrastructure, with all of that, yet your issue is, you can't perfectly adjust for socioeconomic status. Like, those are contradictory positions. That's absurd.
Yeah, I really get the sense that Leroy doesn't really, he's not like a quantitative specialist, I don't think. And I've heard it said, he talks about the environmental modeling, and there's uncertainty in the environmental modeling, so we better not recommend any meat reduction. And he had a debate with Irene Herson on that. Oh, he did. There you go. He did do one debate.
Oh, he did one debate. Okay.
One debate with Irene Herson, and she did really, really well in that. That's a great debate. If you haven't seen it, it's well worth watching. But yeah, no. Where was I going? Where was I going with that?
I don't know. Something about he doesn't have a grasp on some of the
right.
stats.
Yeah. He wants to talk about the uncertainty in the modeling, and somebody said to me, like, he hasn't done any of this modeling. He doesn't do these studies, right? Again, it's very easy to pick criticisms in anything, and if your goal is just to say, well, it's uncertain, well, then that becomes pretty easy to do.
And just FYI, I think once we're done with this section, because I know we're almost there, it's like a minute or whatever, probably have to dip out then, which sucks because it's before the process meets. But I mean, if they're going to exonerate process meets, I don't even know if it's worth our time.
Fair enough. All right. Well, we'll do up to the we'll do like another minute of this, and then perhaps we'll do another call, and we'll look at something.
We can always finish it up.
Yeah.
Or we can finish it up later for sure.
Sweet. Well, yeah. Hey, I really appreciate you going through this with me, and let's do like another minute, and then we'll call it.
Yeah.
Out there, right? I think when I look at saturated fat, I think it's generally relatively neutral, and I think what you said, there are population groups that have elevated cholesterol and ApoB from saturated fat proportion of the population. So for those folks, it really could make sense to limit, but it's not necessarily applicable to everyone, right? Red meat, I think, really depends on the context. If you are low in iron, it's probably great to have a lot. If you're very, if you have plenty of iron, and you are prone to
quick question or pause here. My question to him would be, okay, but what if you have high LDL cholesterol and you're low in iron?
Mm,
What would you think? Yeah, or sorry, yeah, I guess if that's the case, so like you don't want too much red meat, but then you want red meat. I wonder what he would say, because like he's equating those two essentially, right? He's saying that like, oh, in this case it's good, in this case it's bad, and the whole time he's been talking about how or they've both been talking about how like iron deficiency is this thing that you just need red meat for, or at least suggesting. They didn't say it's the only route, but it's the only solution they provided. Um, I wonder if you pit those two ideas against each other, which one would win out?
yeah. Mine's saying lost
Oh,
connection. Am I about to time out again?
I don't know. I see you here. Unless the YouTube
If I
dropped out. Let's see if you're still live. I see you're live.
okay,
So
that's
it still
good.
says you're live.
Might be
I
just
guess
be this messing up. If I do a timeout, that's I'll
we're
silently
pretty much
call
at
it
the end
quit.
anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's
Okay.
see if I click play if it goes. There's some sort of problem with the player here.
Okay, I can do it.
Oh, you can?
Yep. Okay, never mind. That's process meat. We'll skip that for now because I don't want to have a headache and I gotta go.
Fair
So,
play, fair play. I'm also it's not playing on my side anyway, so I guess we have some sort of
oh,
problem going on.
okay. But
Anyways,
that was basically the end.
that was a good place for us to leave it. Yeah, we watched about half of this. Anything that you want to say, like in summary, in closing to what we've heard?
I mean, it's all just like nutrient density this, nutrient density that. It's they're ignoring the health outcomes. Like I don't think they really almost at all touched on outcomes like cardiovascular disease or colorectal cancer, other than just kind of alluding to it with the NutriRx papers, which have their own issues. Um, there's also some really weird wishy-washy stuff going on with like, oh, hey, there's confounding in these like more rigorous
Mm,
studies, but let's look at this other study that has the same issues in spades. um,
right.
like it's all just it's all over the place, and there's a lot of very vague language, which I think is intentional, as you pointed out. I think that's super intentional. If it's vague, but you say it with confidence, and maybe it's on a hot topic or something, maybe it lands with some people, and it's sort of a part of their whole messaging scheme, so to speak. But um, I don't know. I like it's frustrating, obviously, to listen to when you're not there to rebut what they're saying. Because I think it's so easy to rebut the vast majority of what they've said. Um, but here's hoping that Freddie there will do his second debate at some point.
Yeah,
We
we'll
can get on there.
see. We'll see about that. Hey, and yeah, I feel my feeling is yeah the same. They've obviously ignored all the health outcome stuff. They're talking about uh, lower level evidence to kind of allude to the points that they're trying to make. My feeling is that Ty Beale ought to know better, and I really don't know if Freddie does, because I just don't think he has a
Fair.
good understanding of evidence, like the hierarchy of evidence or anything like that. I kind of have the feeling that Ty Beale ought to know better, but evidently not. This was kind of like scripted. They're teeing each other up to just go, well, what do you think about iron bioavailability and stuff like that? It's like,
Yeah.
yeah. This video was called "Vegan Diet Risks" on the interview as they've uploaded it. I don't think that they have made a very compelling case for the risks of vegan diets here. And in fact, I think we're in agreement that if you're going to eat meat, you ought to be very careful in planning a diet.
Yep. I think that's the big takeaway. If you're gonna eat meat as a regular part of your diet, you got to be super careful about constructing your diet. And
Exactly.
let's just flip the script. Flip the script on them.
Exactly. Exactly. All right, Matthew Nagra, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you, and
No problem.
perhaps we'll watch the second half sometime. Hey,
Sounds good.
awesome. Thanks so much, dude. We'll speak soon.
All right. See ya.
Well, there we go, guys. I'll save the rest of that. We're about halfway through that. Perhaps we'll listen to the rest another time. There's the processed meats part coming up, cultural and nutritional context, role of animal source foods in human nutrition, critique of Eat Lancet. Okay, that'll be an interesting one. Yeah, there's lots more here that we could get into, but I think that was a pretty good debunking session. Let's finish off this shrimp welfare debate, and then I'll call it. So let me pull up. What do I want here? So this one? Yeah, here we go. All right, I guess we're just seeing the sort of Discord screen here, but we have about another minute and a half on this debate.
Okay, with that, but you're not going to disagree. Yeah, but we're not going to. That's not. You're not going to find dispute with that here. Like, we regard chickens as like relevantly morally sentient, like we're relevantly sentient creatures.
Okay, in which case, like corporate campaign charities plausibly avert.
We're not. But okay, but if so then we can look at the. Yeah, I'm not opposed to saying it's important to look at the empirics of what corporate campaign charities for chickens do.
And there's one more thing which
that wasn't the point of. Yeah, but that wasn't the point of contention. We're not going to find dispute there.
Okay, that's fair.
Okay, that was kind of a neat bow on a lot of my questions about this conversation earlier, which, I never know with these guys if there's like some more fundamental thing going on as to why there's no moral compulsion to give to charity or something like that. Sounds like Abbey is on board with the principle of effective altruism, if not the practice.
I suppose I've been demolished, and
well, who knows, right? There could be there's probably another whole argument there.
And broken on the question of shrimp welfare.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So just remember, facts don't care about your feelings. You've been destroyed by facts and logic in this debate, and I'm just kidding. Anyway, okay.
Mm-hmm.
I can hear everyone just fine, Isaac. I think it's you. Okay, but anyway, all right. I got to go to work. Yes, I work at very weird hours, but anyway.
104. Damn, that's crazy. All right, yeah. Bye.
All right, bye.
Interesting. Isaac's typing in chat here at the end. Should also push him off donating to effective charities over developing tech. I know. Obviously, Isaac's very into cultivated meat and supporting that. And yeah, I mean, I think there can be some effective charities that do that. We mentioned a couple for the Good Food Institute and for New Harvest as well. But okay, that was all for this shrimp debate. It was an empirical point. It sounds like a very interesting empirical point. I'm pleased that we didn't oversell our estimate here. Right, we've left out those high shrimp welfare project estimates from our average. And very much enjoyed going through the Ty Beale and Freddie Leroy stuff. I hope that everyone enjoyed that. I will stitch that together. Shame that the stream cut out halfway and nuked the coverage there. But I'll stitch together those two and upload a video which is responding to the nutrition stuff there. Yeah, Matthew Nagra is incredible at that. Really encyclopedic knowledge of all of the studies that are going to get brought up and all of the criticisms and counter-criticisms. I would love to see one of these guys debating with Matthew, or just debating with anybody who can hold them to the misinformation components of what they're saying. It's on some level surprising how basic their discourse was and how easy it is to point to problems. The main thing at the moment seems to be that the pro-meat people want to stay on really mechanistic stuff, and basically they just want to kind of hammer their talking points and ignore the broader context. So they'll talk about bioavailability as a big one. They'll talk about nutrient density as a big one. They'll talk about ultra processing as a big one. These things are all just proxies that suggest that meat is going to be healthy, But if you actually look at the health outcome data, that's not what we find. And so we listened to half an hour of Ty Bill and Freddie Leroy going through mechanistic stuff, sort of theoretical postulating, no mention of health outcomes. And then when they do come to talk about health outcomes, they are getting a lot wrong with the empirical analysis there as well. So these guys will never agree to debate this topic, needless to say. But it's instructional for us to go through and see the kind of flavor of misinformation. And, you know, from my perspective, very impressive to see that Matthew's so well equipped to deal with it. And, you know, so well briefed on all of the different arguments there. Right, well, I'm going to wrap it up. It's midnight for me. And, yeah, it's been a long week. So we're going to leave it there. But thank you guys for tuning in. Really appreciate everyone who has listened. And I'll try to get into some more regular streaming. I probably have to pick a day a week to do it, is the thing. So we'll see if we can't get a more regular stream going forward. But appreciate you guys joining, and look out for that video. Much appreciation to Matthew Nagra also for joining the stream today. Yeah, really feel like I learned a lot there. All right, awesome. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. I'll catch you soon. Cheers.